If you're watching this because you want to pass the PLE and become a licensed MD, this video is for you. Now, over the past 3 years, I've mentored and given advice to a few hundred postgraduate interns and test takers of the PLE, or the Physician Licensure exam in the Philippines, and in this video, I want to share some of the advice with you. And if we haven't met before, hi, my name is Karl, I'm a doctor in the Philippines, and I ranked third in the PLE back in September 2017. And in 2023, I created a question bank called MedQBank, designed specifically for the PLE. And since then, over 600 students have used it to do practice tests and figure out what topics actually come up in the exam and remember more in less time. And most of them have passed and are now licensed MDs. And I've also done mentorship sessions with some of them, helping them figure out what to focus on and how to study more effectively. And I've seen so many of their success stories along the way. So in this video, I want to share the same advice that I gave them so you can also pass the exam. And if you want to check out MedQBank, there are more details in the description below. Let's get into it. Now, one of the most common questions that I get from med students, clerks, and postgraduate interns is this: when should I start studying for the PLE? And the answer really depends. If you're currently doing your internship, most of you are doing 12-hour shifts in the hospital with barely any downtime. And if you're doing a night shift, some nights you don't even get a minute of sleep, right? And that makes it harder to find the time to study, because when you're on your hospital duty or hospital shift, you're focused on doing the actual hospital work, and when you're finally off duty, you would rather take a break or go out with friends or just catch up on your favorite Netflix series. And that's totally understandable. Like, I've been through the same struggles when I was doing my internship, and some of you are still medical students dealing with weekly exams, or maybe you're a new medical clerk who's still getting used to doing the hospital work after years of just sitting in lectures and studying at home when you were in med school. So yeah, I get that it's hard to figure out how studying for the boards fits into all of that, but wherever you are in your journey, whether you're a student, a clerk, or an intern, the advice that I always give the students I've mentored is this: start now. Because if you delay your preparation until after internship, when most students usually start, you'll only have about 3 months before the October exam, or maybe 6 to 7 months if you're taking it in March or April. And honestly, it becomes overwhelming, because what usually happens is that students try to cram 4 years worth of medical knowledge into just a few months. And you're trying to study everything you've learned since first year of med school in this tiny window. And that obviously leads to burnout. A lot of those postgraduate interns who are studying for the PLE, they end up exhausted, anxious, and not even sure what to prioritize anymore. But the truth is, this 3-minute study period that most people follow, that number is arbitrary. It's not a rule that the only time that you can or should study for the exam is after you've done your internship. You actually don't have to wait for internship to end or for the official review season to start before you begin studying, because that actually is what sets people up to not make it on their first attempt, or at least to suffer unnecessarily. Because when I studied for my PLE in 2017, I started on the very first day of my internship. Like, I didn't wait for any review season. Like, I just started. And that obviously gave me more time to go through all of the material that I needed to cover. And I had more time to remember the information instead of just rushing through it. And to be honest, I enjoyed it way more, because the stuff that I was studying, it didn't feel random anymore, because it actually became more relevant. For example, I would study a topic, and then a few days later, I'd see a patient with that condition in the hospital. And it's such a different kind of learning when you can immediately apply what you're studying. And it sticks much better, and it makes much more sense. Instead of just memorizing random facts from your book or a lecture, you're actually connecting it to real clinical experiences on the ward. So wherever you are right now, whether you're still in med school or you're doing clerkship or already deep into internship, don't wait. Because you don't need the perfect time or to wait until the end of internship. You just need to start. And once you do, the next question that usually comes up is, okay, I've decided that I wanted to start, but where exactly do I start? And that leads us to advice number 2, which is where to start. Now, the usual advice that I always hear people say to students who want to start studying for the PLE is just study the cases you see during internship or clerkship. Like, for example, if you see a patient with a myocardial infarction, just study myocardial infarction and you should be fine. Honestly, that's not bad advice. Like, I did that as well during my internship. But I soon realized that a lot of the topics that come out in the PLE are not the ones that you commonly see in the hospital, because most of the cases that you'll come across during internship are just the usual ones, you know, the COPD, asthma, heart failure, for example. But when you do practice tests that are based on the topics that came out in the previous exams, you'll notice that a lot of the topics will feel oddly specific or even random. Stuff that you wouldn't usually come across during your hospital duties. And it makes you wonder why is this even a question? Or will I ever even use this information in real life? And that's a reality of the PLE. Even if you ask the students who've taken it recently, they'll tell you the same thing, that a lot of the topics that will come out in the exam are things that you won't even encounter in the wards at all. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that relying on just the cases that you will see during internship is usually not enough. And so what I usually tell the students is this: if there's one resource that you should start with if you want to start studying for the PLE, it should be practice tests that are designed specifically for the PLE. And it shouldn't be just any practice test, because not all of them are designed for the PLE. For example, some students use books like Harrison's Board Review. And while it's a pretty good resource, it's actually made for the American board exams. What you'll see is that the questions are long, they're clinical, and often they follow a two-step format, and they focus on a lot of topics like sarcoidosis or even rare arrhythmias, which are good for USMLE preparations, but not as relevant for the PLE. It's the same thing with other QBanks like UWorld and AMBOSS, but the topics and the format, they don't always match what usually comes out in the PLE. And that's why I created MedQBank. So it's a question bank specifically designed for the PLE, because questions are based on what the actual topics are that have come out in the previous PLE. They're not the exact questions, but the topics that tend to get asked again and again. Now, let me give you a quick example. In internal medicine in the PLE, there's almost always a question about rheumatoid arthritis, right? In October 2023, there was a question about the first-line drug, and in the next exam, it was about the mechanism of action of that drug. And then in 2024, the question then shifted to joint deformities, and the next one, it was about the extra-articular manifestations of the disease. It's different questions, but same topic. And that's the pattern. And by doing PLE specific practice tests, it sort of trains your brain to spot those patterns. And that way, when you finally study your handouts or watch your lecture videos, you start paying more attention to those high yield topics because you've already seen them come up before in the practice tests. And so you don't just passively read through your handouts, you're now reading with more purpose and more focus on what you should absolutely know for the exam. And I wish I had something like MedQBank when I was studying for the PLE in 2017, because back then we only had random sample exams from friends, and most of which didn't even have answers, or worse, they had answers but no explanations, so you would be wasting your time trying to find out if the answer was even right. With MedQBank, every question has an explanation and a reference, so you can double check and learn from it right away, so you won't have to waste time flipping through the books just to double check if the answer in some random sample exam is actually right. And one more thing is that you should start doing practice tests now, even before you've read any of your handouts or watched any of your lecture videos, because honestly, at this point, especially if you're a postgraduate intern, it's not like you don't know anything at all. I mean, you've already studied a lot back in medical school. And so the real issue is that you're just not sure what you've already forgotten. Because the problem with starting with reading books or watching lecture videos is that it's easy to get bored or overwhelmed because you don't really know what to focus on. And you end up just skimming through everything. But if you've done a few practice tests beforehand, then when you finally sit down with your notes, certain topics will tend to stand out more, and they will feel more important and more relevant, and you'll naturally try harder to remember them. And that's what happened to me personally, and it's also what led me to develop a study framework I call the Fill the Gaps framework, which I talked about in a separate video. You can check that out somewhere up here if you want to see the step-by-step process of how I used it for my studying for my PLE and my internal medicine board exam, or the PSBIM. Now, when I was studying for my PLE, I followed a very strict schedule. I'd wake up around 5:30 or 6 a.m. and then I study for 4 to 5 hours in the morning, and then another 4 to 5 hours in the afternoon, and then maybe 2 more hours in the evening. And that gave me around 10 or 12 hours of studying a day, every day for 3 months. And this is how my schedule looked like back then. And I know that might sound like overkill, and some people might even say that it's too rigid or that it's a bit of hustle culture. But for me, there was a reason behind it, because I've never considered myself naturally smart. Like back in elementary and high school, I ranked near the bottom of my class. And I wasn't one of those people who could just study for like maybe 6 hours and still rank in the top 10. And I actually know someone who studied 6 to 7 hours a day and still ranked 6 in the PLE, but I knew I wasn't that kind of person, and so I had to make up for it by putting in more hours, not because I wanted to be better than anyone, but because I wanted to give myself the best chance of getting a high score and passing the exam. Because for me, doing more hours meant I could go through more topics, like do more practice tests, and improve the odds of me passing the exam. And it's like something that I once heard in a Kobe Bryant interview, and he said the reason that he became better than most of the other players wasn't just talent, it was because when others were doing 2 workouts a day, he was doing 3. And that extra session, done consistently over months and years, it added up to making him a better basketball player than his competitors. And here's that clip.
If your job is to try to be the best basketball player you can be, right? To do that, you have to practice, you have to train, right? You want to train as much as you can, as often as you can. So if you get up at 10 in the morning, train at 11, right? 12, say 12, train at 12, train for 2 hours, 12 to 2. You have to let your body recover. So you eat, recover, whatever. You get back out, you train, start training again at 6. Train from 6 to 8, right? And now you go home, you shower, you eat dinner, you go to bed, you wake up, you do it again, right? Those are 2 sessions, right? Now imagine you wake up at 3, you train at 4. You go 4 to 6, come home, breakfast, relax, blah, blah, blah. Now you're back at it again, 9 to 11, right? You relax, and now all of a sudden you're back at it again, 2 to 4, and now you're back at it again, 7 to 9. Look how much more training I have done by simply starting at 4, right? And so now you do that, and as the years go on, the separation that you have with your competitors and your peers just grows larger and larger and larger and larger and larger. And by year 5 or 6, doesn't matter what kind of work they do in the summer, they're never going to catch up because they're 5 years behind. Right? So it makes sense to get up and start your day early because you can get.
And that really stuck with me. And that's what I did. Like, I showed up earlier, I studied longer, and I stuck to my routine, even on the days that I didn't feel like it. And I'm not saying that you have to copy exactly what I did, but wherever you're starting from, like whether you're naturally good at remembering things or you feel like you need to catch up more, having a study schedule gives you that structure because it helps you feel like more in control of your day, and that alone makes things less overwhelming. Because when your motivation starts to fade, and it will, that structure is what will help you stay consistent in your studying. And this consistency is what will really get you through the review season and help you pass the exam. So build a schedule that works for you and make sure you stick with it. All right, so we've basically talked about some study advice that I would give to someone who wants to pass the PLE. And if you're interested in more study techniques, then you might like to check out this video over here. It has 3 things you can do to study much faster and more effectively. Now, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.